To hear the oral defense of Samuel Mathey of his dissertation. University rules require that an oral defense be held, and this represents a path-breaking event for the Department of Economics, at least, in providing the first internet defense, and something that's probably going to be more commonplace in the future, as so many of our graduate students are foreign students, and they may be located abroad during the time of a defense. And so we're hoping that this goes smoothly, and look forward to hearing Samuel's defense today. I asked Samuel to give about a 30 to 40 minute presentation of his dissertation, touching only on the highlights in that short period of time. And then following Samuel's presentation, the committee will have an opportunity to ask questions and perhaps have a little exchange of ideas for work that's been done and future work that might be forthcoming. So I'd like to turn it over to you now, Samuel, for your part of your presentation. And you now have it.
Okay, thanks, Beth. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Professor Seidman, and then Professor Schweizer, and then my greetings to Professor Buckwheat as well, who is not among us today. The dissertation defense will be on the two essays on economic growth, workers' remittances, HIV, and then foreign direct investment. I mean, basically, I would like to thank God and then Professor Abrams for his resilience towards me in terms of supporting me, and then he has been a very, very great support. Professor Buckwheat, Professor Seidman, Professor Schweizer, Professor Hoffman, Professor Levis, Mary Martin, Deborah, and my wife, as well as my deceased father, and all those persons who have been instrumental for me to see this day in oral defense. I mean, basically, it's a very difficult task that Bert gave me, because summarizing in 30 minutes work that we have done over 5 years and more is a very, very difficult task. But I'll try to do it to my best, and then in 30 minutes, try to get to the salient point of these two essays. The agenda I'm suggesting today is first look at the motivation that were behind this dissertation, and then move on to summarize the key findings, and then I'll go on to each essay. We have two essays, and then for each essay, we're going to look at the statement of the problem and research question, a quick review of the literature, and then I will talk a little bit about the model, the variable and data, and then the result, and then the key points of the discussion I had, and then eventually conclusion and future paths. And the last part of the agenda will be for me in this presentation is to connect the dots between the two essays and then give a conclusion. I mean, basically the motivation, why HIV, why remittances, why FDI, why sub-Saharan Africa, why that period. I mean, basically HIV today has no cure, is a disease that kills around 2.7 million people every year, of whom we have around 2 million people that die from HIV/AIDS in Africa alone. Remittances are kind of one of the key main capital flow that are going into poor countries right now. And today, for instance, the flow of remittances from Europe to poor countries is twice the flow of foreign aid from Europe to those same countries. FDI is very important in terms of capital flow. It's still the first capital flow to poor countries and developed countries. And geographically, like I said, sub-Saharan Africa today has like 22 million of the infected, HIV infected, and then that's around like 70% of HIV annual death, and then as well as HIV infected. 1980 to 2009, and then we have like a break year, which is 1995. Why 1995? Because 1995 was the year where a cure was discovered for HIV. It's not actually a cure, but it's just like a drug has been discovered to extend the life of people who are infected. I mean, basically, when you look at the Africa growth strategy, you see Levin, Ross, and there has been a lot of publications on that. You can see the top line is North America real per capita GDP trends between 1980 to 2009. And then you have like European Union GDP per capita trends over those years. And then you can see that Africa has all along has never gone above 5,000 real per capita GDP for all those years. So that's a serious problem. And then the GDP growth, which is the second graph at the bottom, you'll see that, but there are some hopes in the sense that when you see the GDP growth by geographical area, Africa is the red one. You'll see that from 2001 towards 2009, Africa has experienced an increase in GDP growth, which is something encouraging. This is the face of HIV. A lot of American people, when we talk about HIV, they have a very vague idea of it. But these pictures are giving you the true face of HIV and how HIV can destroy a person. You can see HIV, it's kind of, you lose, when you are infected, you can lose up to 65% of your body weight, and is a very, very disastrous, I would say, disease that really touch not only the person who is infected, but everybody around him. And then again, today we have 2 million deaths every year of HIV/AIDS in Africa. So SA1, the main result of SA1 is that HIV has a positive effect on per capita GDP. This is consistent with Young's seminal paper on the gift of the dying. And then growth and then direct measure of HIV, growth and direct measure of FDI has no effect on per capita GDP growth. Our results equally suggest that the HIV per capita GDP growth relation is non-linear because what Young did was that Young just proved that HIV has a positive relation with per capita GDP growth. So our result suggested that there is a tipping point as far as the HIV growth relation, per capita GDP growth relation is concerned. And then we tried to estimate that tipping point, and that tipping point was around like 14.3%. And for sub-Saharan Africa is like 35.7%. So for SA2, to summarize SA2, what we've, our finding in SA2 suggested that home country HIV and FDI are determinants of migrant workers' remittances. And the remittances are defined as the money transfer that workers living in a host country send to their family left behind or their relatives. So the remittances behavior of female migrant is different from that of male migrants. And then what we found in SA2 as well, our results suggest as well that home country FDI inflow is a robust determinant of remittances. And then we equally found in SA2 that foreign aid has a negative effect on remittances. So that suggests what? That suggests that migrants are trying to free ride on remittances. So when you have an increase in foreign aid to a country, usually our results suggest that usually the migrants from that country will reduce their remittances as the foreign aid to that country is increasing. So SA1 selected literature review, HIV effect on growth is not conclusive. We have negative effect as in Bonnell 2000A and then 2000B. And then for Bloom and Hart 1997, there was no effect. And we had like positive effect with Young, as I said. The effect of FDI on growth is not conclusive as well. We have positive effect with Babatunde using African data, and then negative effect of FDI on growth with Yamin et al. But one of the things is that those studies find conditions for FDI to have a positive relation with growth. Our model for SA1 basically is an empirical model. The first essay, we use a three-stage least square with three growth equations. We endogenously determine the value of FDI. The variable and the data, most of our data are from the World Bank. And then we have the per capita GDP growth. We use the standard Barrow equation to compute the GDP growth. And then we have control variables like telephone lines for physical capital. Human capital was the school enrollment of tertiary. And then we have why tertiary? Tertiary because today the primary and secondary education level, most of the poor countries have caught up with advanced countries in terms of primary education, and then the difference is not so much for secondary education as well. So tertiary education is the current education level where you have enough variability to justify some interesting results. So we have HIV for sure, and ODA, which is foreign aid, official development assistance, population growth, and then heritage freedom index. So these are some of our results. Basically, we have like a base model, and then we progressively introduce our variable of interest, basically FDI and HIV. And then the result, like we can see in the full sample for full sample model 5, is that HIV has a positive relation, is significant, and then we have as well FDI, which is not significant when we use in model 5, when we use the direct measure of FDI, but FDI is significant when we use the endogenously determined value of FDI. So, what we have here is we try to focus here on sub-Saharan Africa in those models. And then what we did basically was trying to use different measures of human capital. It was quite interesting for us to check on what educational level will affect more growth when it is hit by HIV. So model 3 is like we try to estimate with a primary educational level in sub-Saharan Africa. Model 4 was on secondary education, and Model 5 was on tertiary education. Again, our result from the general model full sample has been confirmed with the sub-Saharan Africa model, which is consistent. You can see that HIV is robust and positive. And then FDI, again, FDI, when we introduce the endogenous FDI, the endogenous FDI is positive. Some of the result as well, we have we found that ODA, or official developer assistant, was not significant, and the trade openness and other control variable have usually the standard results. What we did in the next slide was we tried to compare, to run that result and see how other geographical regions react in the same context of those variables. I mean, basically, you'll see that we couldn't have we couldn't run it for Europe, for HIV, and then for the Middle East as well. And that's one of the shortcomings, and then we'll discuss about it later in this presentation, is that the data for HIV, we don't have enough data from countries like, or geographical areas like Middle East, because of the Muslim or Islamic religion tradition that does not allow women enough freedom. So in those regions, HIV agencies or UN AIDS agency found it difficult to test HIV test women. So there's no really reliable data for those, available data for those geographical regions like Middle East and North Africa. For Europe, the problem for Europe is the low rate, so we have like near zero rate, so that's why we couldn't input the HIV into the model run for those geographical regions. So what we did here was we tried to run, we tried to estimate using compare low-income economies to lower middle economies and high-income economies. And then basically the result from the general model is full sample is confirmed here with HIV. HIV is positive and conforming, consistent with Young's finding. And then for the FDI, we found a result that we did not expect here, but later on that some literatures explain. So we found like a negative relation for FDI direct measures, but we'll explain that later on. So what we did here was like we tried to estimate using a structural break. And then again, 1995 has been a turnaround year for HIV in the sense that it was in 1995 that the cure, not really the cure, but a drug and accredited drug has been put on the market, but that drug only extends the life of those infected. So we can see that basically the HIV is becoming, relation with growth from that period is becoming negative. And one of the intuition is that as we can see, you can see in the previous slide, I'm going to those slides, you see how HIV can turn a person in. You all agree with me that such a person cannot be productive, such a person cannot go to work, such a person is really limited and can only live till the end of his life or till his death, can only live with assistance. So we can understand that if such a person because initially people with HIV infection can die quickly within weeks or months, but with the drug on the market that extend the life of the infected, the person can live for more years. So what is happening is that our intuition here is that that person at the same time will be living for more years, but at the same time, as you can see on the pictures that I've just displayed, that person cannot be productive. So basically what has been happening is that that person becomes a burden for around himself, whereby people have to take care of him, and then he has to stop going to work. He cannot do anything productive. So basically our intuition is that what the drug has done is extending the life of the people who are infected, but at the same time turning them into a burden. To say, I don't really like the expression because we all have dear people or dear families in Africa who are infected, and then we all want as a utility function to see them live as long as they can. So our key variable of interest, again, just to summarize, is our proposition for HIV was significant and positive, as in the Black Plague effect. When you read the dissertation manuscript, you hear of the Black Plague effect in Europe in the year 1348, and that was our stick regarding suggesting HIV significant and positive effects. And then on FDI, the result is mitigating. Though we had the expected result for our region of interest, which is sub-Saharan Africa, the result for other regions were negative. And that is consistent with some strand of the literature that believe that HIV, to some extent, can have like a negative effect if depending on the sector that is focused on. The endogenous FDI has the significant and positive effect that we expected. So this is how we do the nonlinear analysis, and this just shows the nonlinear analysis. For the sub-Saharan Africa, the t-statistic was weakly significant, but and then for the full sample, it was weakly significant as well. So the discussion we had was on the country's national HIV Sentinel surveillance system. The Sentinel surveillance system is the name for the national statistic on HIV that the United Nations suggested to all countries in the world. So what that Sentinel surveillance system does is to collect information on HIV prevalence rate. So we believe that with that knowledge on the tipping point, it's very important for policymakers to have a reliable knowledge of the prevalence rate in their country, so as to check if they have reached or they are getting near the tipping point or not. And what we suggested in the discussion as well, the potentially infected, is that at this point in time, there is no compulsory test of HIV in any country because of human rights, and then people fought for that. So what we are saying is that the current Sentinel surveillance system depends on voluntary testing, and meanwhile, there has been evidence that some of the people who are infected may not necessarily go for testing. So we believe that there is a potential stock of infected that are in any country, but that have not been tested and that are not in the surveillance system. So basically, based on that information, or based on that hypothesis, we are saying that any country should always rather increase the prevalence rate if they are doing any policy plan. On focusing on the allied, because we focus on the tertiary educated, and then we've seen that as in sub-Saharan Africa, the tertiary educated affect more severely growth than secondary or primary educated level. So there's something interesting, which is the working group on higher education of the Association of the Development of Education in Africa. What they are suggesting is that all elite and tertiary educated people in Africa should receive a training regarding HIV and then should test for HIV. And the Nigerian indigenization policy is a policy regarding FDI, because we've seen that FDI is more efficient when there is policy, when there is good policy. So the Nigeria is example is kind of like a counter policy. And then the Côte d'Ivoire Plan de Développement Stratégique is another policy to attract FDI, but they are focusing on human development. So what they do is that they are creating a lot of schools, technical schools, to train their people, and then they are training them to be more entrepreneurial, so that when foreign investors comes, the local people can create entrepreneurial ventures and then develop local economy as well. The Nigerian one was different in the sense that Nigeria rather focused on putting a lot of constraint on foreign investors in terms of they cannot send back their profit and so on and so forth. So a conclusion, I have to move fast because of time. Conclusion and future path. More recent HIV data needed is now that most countries are putting in place the surveillance system, and with more reliable HIV data, our study will be confirmed, and then there could be more analysis. So the second essay is on HIV and FDI effect on migrant workers' remittances. Worker remittances have become an important source of capital for poor countries. As you can see, worker remittances as a percentage of GDP has been growing steadily from 1997, which is the year that we had like a turning point year for remittances. And then remittances actually have overtaken foreign aid in terms of capital flow into poor countries and developing countries. And then again, we've shown here, for instance, when you see the first table here, FDI remittances in the around 1997 has overtaken ODA in terms of capital flow, and then is growing, and then now almost close to FDI. Sorry. And then the statement of the problem is here. Low-income economies lack capital. We know that based on the standard neoclassical growth model, we need both human capital and then physical capital for growth. And then low-income countries and poor economies, they lack both. So the flow of money sent, again, like I said the flow of money sent to the home countries by migrants today is more than even the foreign aid that is flowing to those countries. So the challenge for policymakers is on how they can turn those money transferred by migrants or immigrants in host country to their home country, how those home policymakers can turn those capital flow into an economic development instrument. So this research, we believe, is important for home policymakers because that can help them identify which instrument to use to streamline remittances towards macroeconomic objectives. And then the result it can as well be used by multilateral institutions like World Bank, IMF to better allocate aid. And that's what European Union is trying to do right now, and France as well, because they've realized that the money the immigrants in their country send to their home country is larger, far larger than the foreign aid the developed countries are sending to those same countries. So in terms of literature review here, remittances are now the second largest flow of funds and capital to developing countries. World Bank, Yogo, 2011, sorry. And there has been like three strands, but we can summarize them into two main strands in the remittances literature. The first strand is the micro level strand, and that strand has been pioneered by Lucas and Stark and then Strober. They believe that the determinant of remittances are basically microeconomic determinants. So they don't believe in the macroeconomic determinant of remittances. And then the second strand is the strand that rather believes that the determinants of remittances are macroeconomic determinants and not microeconomic determinants. And that strand has been pioneered by Finney eventually. And then remittances. So we have listed here a number of micro-level consensual determinants of remittances, which are like migrant income, gender, age, education level, and so on and so forth. As you can see, the problem with the micro-level determinant of remittances is that you need to do survey, you need to question people, and whenever we talk about survey and then doing questionnaires, there is the reliability of the data that are an issue. And basically, those are some of the consensus in terms of determinants, macroeconomic determinants of remittances. Regarding the macroeconomic determinants of remittances, those consensual, those variables have made consensus in the literature, and then below are some of the literature, the publications that have supported that, like El Badawi, Finney, Friend, and Spatafora, which are the most cited. And then we have like stock of migrants, exchange rate, interest rate differential, inflation, and so on and so forth. We have not been able to use some of those variables because, again, like I said, HIV data is still in its infancy. So introducing the HIV data means that you have to forego some of the countries who have not reported HIV data all along. So the model 2 is a panel data. We use a random effect, basically the data covering 1997 to 2007, 1997 being the turning year in remittances flow surge. And then in terms of variable, we use the remittances over GDP, which is the standard dependent variable that is used in the remittances literature. And then other independent variables are real per GDP per capita, foreign aid, which is ODA, FDI, real effective exchange rate, rate of new businesses creation. And what we did basically was to run an OLS first to test our basic assumption. And then again, we can see that, for instance, ODA is basically when we use the traditional and then the conventional dependent variable, ODA is negative. We kind of rerun those and with the random effect. And then what we can see here is that, again, our ODA is negative. And then we have the HIV. The problem with the HIV estimated coefficient here is that the estimated coefficient of HIV is not significant. And then I will explain it shortly. And the diaspora, which is the stock of migrants, is a very strong aspect that's consistent with literature, is very strong determinant of remittances. So the more migrants a home country has, the more remittances are sent to the country. So, I mean, basically, what we have here is that number 6, we kind of use the lag value of ODE, foreign aid, and then we see that there is no, is not significant, and basically that suggests that diaspora and then migrants have like a current value. They look at the current value of the foreign aid or not the lag value. But number 7, model 7 and 8, what we did in model 7 is to use the endogenously determined value of ODA, and then in number 8 we kind of cross FDI with the home rate of business creation, and that has been positive. I mean, basically what we did here in number 4 and then number 5, number 3 and then 4 here is that we use in number 3 we use the female because in the remittances literature it has been proved that female usually have a different behavior from female migrants, have a different behavior from male migrants. So that difference in behavior has been confirmed at the remittances level. So in estimate model number 3, we can see that when we use the female migrant stock, the HIV prevalence rate has a positive sign. So female migrants, whenever there is an increase in the prevalence rate, they will increase their remittances. While number 4, the coefficient for male migrants, when we use only male migrants, the HIV estimated coefficient is negative, suggesting that male migrants are usually in poor countries. The HIV rate, as the HIV rate increases, they reduce their remittances. And again, we believe that those are the intuition. There could be a lot of intuition there. We've discussed some of them. But basically, my take would be those goals that will go more into social science. And then number 5, the model 5 was the model for sub-Saharan Africa. And then basically we see that in sub-Saharan Africa, the HIV estimated coefficient is not significant. The intuition could be because of the plague of HIV in sub-Saharan Africa. People have become they don't really are not affected anymore by any change in the rate. So those are some of the data statistics, and because of time, basically our results are showing that the HIV being having a positive effect is mitigated. We can see that when we use the full the total stock of migrants, there is no effect. But when we differentiate by gender, we can see that the HIV has a positive effect when we use women remittances behavior, but it has a negative effect when we use male remittances. And then for the FDI is significant and positive. And the intuition here is that whenever there is FDI, foreign investors are coming into a country. So the people from the country outside may look at it as a signal for a credible economic opportunity. So as an example, if a guy from Ghana is living in the U.S. and then he hears that a lot of Americans are going to invest in Ghana, that will, tip him that if foreign investors as American are flowing to Ghana, there should probably be something there. There should probably be a credible economic opportunity, and that can push him into investing as well into Ghana. So the endogenous ODA has effectively a significant and positive, and then we'll discuss that shortly. So in the discussion, we discussed a number of issues, but because of for the sake of time, I still have only just 3 slides. Quick, in the discussion, I took those 2 keys I believe are key. The first discussion for essay 2 is on the European Union, which is doing something very interesting. When the member of parliament in European Union realized that the foreign aid they send to poor countries is less than the money, the remittances that immigrants in Europe are sending to the same country, they had an issue, because they are if those immigrants are sending more money than we send foreign aid, what is the take to send again foreign aid to those countries? But the problem is remittances are of a private nature, because they are determined at a micro level, in the sense that each immigrant decides to send money to his family or not. The person can stop that flow at any time, and then the person can decide on the use of that flow. So if I'm sending money to my parents back home, I can tell them, buy a TV with it, or buy a bicycle, or buy a lawn. Nobody can tell me what to buy with that money. So that's some of the problem with the remittances in the private nature. So what the European Union is doing is that they decided to, first of all, put in place a major policy, in the sense that they are forcing countries to put in place policies that will force people to use official channels. One of the great problem with remittances is that people use unofficial channels, like they can remit money to people hand carry at the airport, or friends who are traveling, and then there are a number of remittances services that are not accredited by the European Union or by the different countries. And then what they are doing too is that they started creating programs to encourage immigrants to use remittances for development in their countries. One of the other key discussion that we find as very interesting is the Savage and Harvey 2007. What they did was trying to prove that foreign aid can be complement to remittances. And then again, what we've seen is that the initial result is that ODA, foreign aid, has a negative relation with remittances. The more foreign aid they send to a country, the less the migrants from that country will send remittances. And so Savage and Harvey proved that we can have complement between those two, remittances and foreign aid, ODA. And then they found 6 episodes of that happening. The 6 episodes are listed because of the sake of time. I won't list them, but they are in the manuscript. But I've derived myself what I call the stylized fact from those 6 episodes, where foreign aid increases at the same time as remittances to a country. So the first one is they happen during periods of disasters. For instance, during the tsunami in Asia, the foreign aid to those Asian countries who were affected by tsunami increases at the same time as remittances to those countries. And then the immediate effect after the disaster is a disruption in remittances. So you have like a J curve whereby just after the disasters, remittances kind of like decrease sharply before increasing again. So increase in remittances may not necessarily be in cash, and so because of the sake of time, I've just moved. So we've kind of just derived 6, and then the bottom line here is that a foreign aid can increase simultaneously with remittances. Conclusion and future paths. To conclude, we can say that our results indicate that home countries' HIV and FDI affect remittances flow. Female migrants are different in their remittances behavior from male migrants. And then ODA, as we can see in Savage, can be complementary to remittances. And then we believe that there is the need to investigate the dynamic of remittances to high-income countries, because some countries like France, they don't have 0 or negative remittances, but they have positive remittances. But so one of the future paths, is to compare the remittances behavior between some of the high-income countries who still have positive inflow of remittances with some of the low or poor countries who have remittances. And then reliable data may provide more analysis. So connecting the dot to end, taken together, the 2 essays shed light on human capital and capital flows that poor countries are in need of for their economic development. HIV is a serious threat to economic growth, and our findings suggest that Young's positive effect has a tipping point, and that in mobilizing resources for HIV from the diaspora, migrant store, poor countries' policymakers should focus on female migrants. And then FDI as a capital flow for development countries can complement remittances, but they need good policies. And then poor countries' migrants can trigger entrepreneurial activities in their home countries, and women are the natural lead for that. And then finally, eventually, policymakers in poor countries have a big challenge with HIV, FDI, and remittances. However, good policies and programs to harness their diaspora and streamline the flow of remittances can be a step in the right direction for a sustainable growth. So that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Samuel. I'd like to now turn over the floor to any of the members of the committee that have questions. I certainly could start. Samuel, you get a different tipping point for the effect of HIV on economic growth. You get different tipping points for the full sample versus the sub-Saharan African sample. And the tipping points are very large differences. Do you have any idea about why the difference would be so large? And I'm wondering if you think the quality of the HIV data is perhaps less reliable on the African side, and that's part of the explanation. But what is your thinking on that?
Bella, I think you are perfectly right in the sense that, again, that was one of my conclusions on the reliability of the HIV data. Again, is now that most of the countries are putting in place the HIV surveillance, a national statistic system to collect HIV data. But at the same time, one intuition could be that we've seen that sub-Saharan Africa hosts more than 70% of the HIV-infected people in the world. And I believe clearly sub-Saharan Africa is an outlier as far as HIV is concerned. And then today, most of the countries being from sub-Saharan Africa, I can tell you that most of the countries have given up. They have given up on the fight against AIDS because of resources. And then with the economic downturn, currently countries are feeling the pressure regarding their budgets. And then in terms of allocation of budget, again, as an economist, economics is the allocation of resources. Most of the countries have reduced their budget regarding HIV programs during this crisis period. So I would say that both will be variable, both will be right answers. First, the reliability of data to some extent, and then secondly, the fact that sub-Saharan Africa is a clear outlier as far as HIV is concerned.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Larry has a question.
Yes, I just want to, first, you've done an enormous amount of work here in putting together all this data and running the regressions, presenting it. I think it's all very, very impressive. Now, I want to just look a little more at this HIV prevalence on the per capita growth rate of
Right.
GDP. You found, am I right, that there's a break, what was it, around 1995?
Right.
When you run the pre-1995, right, you get the positive effect.
Right.
But when you, and that's like the article by Young in the QJE.
Right.
All right, but if you run it for the post from 1995 through to close to the present, it
Right.
reverses and you get a negative effect. Is that right?
Right.
Now, did Young do that, or any of the others do a break in the data and see if there's this kind of reversal?
No. To date, as far as at the time we are submitting this dissertation manuscript, I've not found any literature suggesting that.
Okay, because when you when you present this result, I mean, you've done this. It has two parts really. The pre-1995,
Right.
what you find is similar to Young and others, maybe others, but the post-1995, you find the reverse. So I think you should give at least equal emphasis, make sure to what you have found on that, because I think that's very intriguing, and your explanation was very interesting as to why you think that might have reversed. So I'm just saying, bring out, you have in different places, you've shown that you find one thing for the earlier, another for the later, and it may be because people now are being able to be kept alive, just as you explained. I thought that was very interesting. Now, this also, I want to emphasize to be extremely careful with the policy conclusion. I know you've tried to be, but let me be a little more specific. Sometimes non-economists accuse economists of worshiping the GDP and worshiping GDP growth and just wanting to maximize it. And most economists take offense at that. We say, look, we want to measure GDP per capita and its growth rate, but we economists realize that when you then turn to policy, that's not the only thing that you're looking at. And so we want to be very careful here. When you talk about the tipping point, if somebody were to simplistically say, well, the goal of a society is to maximize GDP, the GDP growth rate per capita, or even the level, then they'd say, well, I guess I should try to encourage more HIV up until the tipping point. Now, we certainly don't want to draw that policy conclusion or have somebody read into your thesis that that is the policy conclusion that comes out of it. And you've tried to talk about that you don't just go straight from GDP growth to then drawing a policy conclusion about, for example, how much treatment or how much research should be done about HIV. But I would urge you to be even more careful when you carve this thesis into articles and are presenting it to the journals and just for others to quote what was learned out of this. Please be very careful about that. I mean, after all, you could stop the, suppose some terrible society were to say we're going to stop the growth rate of our population by whatever means necessary, including killing of young children or something like that. That might raise, with investment in the economy, the growth rate of GDP per capita.
Right.
But everybody would immediately realize, of course, that's not what you then want to do for policy. So let me just pause and get your reaction to these comments.
Lawrence, Professor Simon, I think you are right. I had a very heated debate with Bert on that. Bert can smile because we had a very heated debate on that, the policy implication of that. I mean, definitely. It's true. Today we have like one of the future paths as well could be like trying like HDI, Human Development Index. It's true that people are like economists. They don't have any feeling for human beings. They are just rational and pure economic rational growth. There's a problem in terms of policy implication. I agree with you. After the debate with Bert, I tried to kind of like pull it down a little bit in the sense that in the manuscripts I've talked about a utility, and that's what I tried to do. And I know that there could be probably more that can be done on that rationale. Is that yes, that's the fact, that's the numbers, but at the same time we cannot conclude that policymakers should let things off till they reach the tipping point, because one of the objectives of policymakers is to ensure, going back to Walras, to ensure general equilibrium, to ensure that we have the utility, the general utility is maximized. And the utility of people could be that I can see my mom who is infected HIV live longer. And my reasoning in the manuscripts has been like, that utility should be a legitimate utility, and that policymakers' objectives should be as well to keep as the people live longer as much as possible. So those are some of the things that I've tried based on the discussion I had with Bert as well. Those are some of the ways that I tried to, reframe that policy issues with the tipping point.
Yeah, very good.
The same things, Samuel, when you look at this slide you have up here right now where you're splitting the sample in two parts, econometrically it does not look very strong for the 1980 to 1995 sample. I mean, it's a small number of observations, and you have virtually no coefficients that are significant. So I would be very careful to push those results too far. From an econometric standpoint, and you look at those results for that earlier period.
Yeah, one of the problem as well with that, and that is recognized in the HIV literature, is that the early years of HIV, because HIV, the first, I think it was in 1981, between 1981 and 1995, we didn't really have enough data in as far as HIV is concerned.
Yeah, the data's bad.
So it's from 1995, 1997 that we started having enough data regarding HIV, and that has been recognized in the literature.
Okay, Samuel, I agree with Professor Seidman's comments about being careful, so I re-emphasize that. Could you go back to that previous slide where you just showed some concluding, yeah, that one right there, yeah. You say the endogenous FDI is significant and negative. Don't you mean significant and positive there? In the third column, hypothesis 3 on FDI.
Oh yeah, it should be significant and positive. Sorry.
Okay, so be careful there.
Yeah.
I'd also like to agree with Professor Seidman about the later data that shows basically any kind of HIV occurrence is now causing a negative effect on growth because of the prolonged life. So it strikes me that we're past that tipping point now for all countries, given the structural change that took place in that life can be prolonged with the application of certain drugs. So that I think is the key conclusion that you're getting here. So in that policy planners don't have to estimate where the tipping point is. We've already tipped, given the medical treatment.
The potentially infected.
Yes, yes. I also had another question that dealt with the remittance results, and that you find that the measure of democracy has a negative effect. The more democratic the institutions are, seems to have a negative effect on remittances. And I'm wondering what you make of that. What might be causing that effect?
The intuition here.
Yeah, where is the table that you?
It's further back.
Yeah, I've seen the table.
Democratic institutions.
Yeah.
Negative and significant effect.
The intuition here is that I've talked about it in the manuscript. The more democratic a country is, because there has been links, established evidences in the literature between a democratic regime and then economic freedom. So the intuition is that the more democratic is a country, the more you have economic freedom. And then there has been as well linkages in the literature between economic freedom and then growth. The more you have market-oriented policy in a country, the more you have economic freedom in a country, freedom to create a business, freedom to repatriate funds, freedom to access funds, and so on and so forth. So if you have all those economic freedom, linkages have been found between the economic freedom index and then growth. So therefore, if you have more democracy, you have more economic freedom, and then if you have more economic freedom, you could have potentially growth. And then when you have growth, therefore, you basically you are less in need of, based on based on remittances literature, the more you have growth in a country, therefore, the less people will be in need of remittances. In the sense that initially, remittances are sent to poor families left behind, and that was what is called in the literature the altruist motive for remittances.
Mm-hmm. It suggests that maybe for future work you might want to put in some type of economic growth variable in lieu of some of the other independent variables to see how that that affects the explanation for higher growth might be lower remittances.
I agree with you.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions?
No. Very good.
All right, Samuel. We're going to adjourn to the hallway for a few minutes, and come back and discuss the conclusions we've reached. Okay. So
okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the opportunity, and then I'll be on the waiting side.
Okay.
Just stay right there.
Thanks.